something which
I
is
think
can be
it
there.
is fully understood,
No,
or
no, fully understood.
I mean, it is not
Be-
understood.
No, no, be optimistic. It's fully understood.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, may I request the session chairperson, Mr. B.B. Sharma, to present the memento to our speaker, Mr. Ram Chandra Ghosh. Can we all put our hands together? Big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sharma, please continue.
So our next presentation is can be considered as a big technical because it's a financial one, much more technical than normal technical. So it's a topic is legal consideration for investment in Indian rubber industry. And this is going to be presented by Ms. Rachita Bhatt, who is partner for corporate triangle, trilegal, I'm sorry. And information about Ms. Rachita Bhatt. She is seasoned corporate partner based in Delhi, specializing in mergers, acquisitions, private equity, and general corporate law. With extensive expertise, she has advised both domestic and international clients on diverse transactions such as share and asset acquisitions, strategic investments, exits, joint ventures, and transactions by real estate investment trusts and infrastructure investment trusts. Rachita's practice spans various sectors including manufacturing, commercial, real estate, warehousing, infrastructure, as well as venture capital and private equity in SAS technology, including EdTech technology. Her career includes roles at prominent law firms like Shardul, Amarchand Mangaldas, and SNR Associates, where she excelled as a corporate partner. Educated at ILS College, Pune, she and admitted to the Bar Council of Delhi. Rachita has been recognized as notable practitioner for corporate and M&A by Asia Law 2023 and listed among other key lawyers in corporate M&A by Legal 500 Asia Pacific 2024 ranking. Her expertise and dedication continue to drive impactful legal solution for her clients in India's dynamic corporate landscape. So with that, is all yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir. I think the introduction of my profile may be a little bit longer than my whole presentation itself, but let's try and keep this a little bit more interactive and interesting. I know it's been a long day, and I don't usually like being a speaker at 5 p.m. when people are very low on energy and a lot of your mind space is already occupied with all of the information that has been fed to you over the day. And I have been a part of the sessions today, and unlike some of the other conferences I've been at, I think these tend to be quite technical and very informative, and especially for a lawyer, this has been very, very interesting. I hope to bring to you some very different perspectives and sort of open the room up for discussion on the sector with a very different sort of focus area, right? Now jumping right into it, this is the agenda of our presentation, but we'll just walk through some of the important aspects. Why am I here to speak today? And why was this topic even introduced in such a technical sort of forum where everybody is talking about, very interesting, very minute, very nuanced details of the industry? Well, I think to very simply put it, the statistics on rubber and the industry have been extremely competitive. I would say that this creates a very buoyant environment, especially when the focus is on manufacturing, when the government is so focused on both on infra side and on the manufacturing side. And I personally work a lot on the manufacturing side. And we've seen huge interest both from the government's end and from the investor side and from private capital, whether it's debt, whether it's equity. We see a lot of movement on the manufacturing side. Now, having said that, I think this industry functions to a balance between two subsectors, we could say broadly. There's rubber production on one end, and there's rubber products manufacturing on the other end, right? So rubber is obviously a very versatile raw material. It is used in the manufacturing of products that I don't think we can put a number on. Which brings us to all of the key allied sectors. There's defense, there's electronics, there's construction, and of course the favorite being automobiles. All of these sectors have one thing in common, and that is the government is hyper-focused on improving the manufacturing numbers in each of these sectors, which means there is a huge gap to sort of plug from the raw material side, which is where I think all of you all come in, and all of you need to participate and sort of see this vision through. There is a lot of policy movement at, you could say, at a bureaucratic level, but at this level, we need to understand where the opportunities lie and sort of, expand on those opportunities, or understand the opportunities better. Whether you want to explore them or not, of course, is a separate matter altogether. These are just some interesting numbers because we just want to show you how well some of these sectors are doing currently, and we have a very important role to play in each of these sectors, and that's why we've sort of brought up these numbers. Again, Reliant Industries, rubber statistics, India versus global rubber statistics, excellent numbers. I mean, that's why we're here, and that's why we're talking about this. But my job is to run you through how and where we can plug the gap. Now, there are a bunch of government policies. I think one of the most significant policy in the industry came up as a national rubber policy, where there was some effort to sort of understand where is the deficit, where can we work better. The traditional states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, where most of the focus lied, I think we moved away from those states and tried to do something better with, in terms of production, in terms of plantation, in terms of synthetic rubber, trying to give some sort of roadmap, right? But the policy is again just a policy. It is a good to know, good to have, encouraging sort of step in the direction, but are there any clause or is there any teeth to the policy? Not really. But now let's look at some other policies which have maybe not had a direct impact, but will in the future definitely impact the industry in a big way. If I had to pick one, I would pick PLI, because PLI was the buzzword in say March of 2020 was when we first started hearing of PLI, and it was launched then with the then favorite sector, which was of course electronics. That was also the poster boy of the PLI scheme, because a lot of electronic products started getting manufactured in India, particularly the production and export of mobile phones became extremely, extremely impressive. But why are we talking about PLI? We're talking about PLI because the next focus area for PLI, or the largest focus area for PLI going forward, would be automobiles. And there we come in a big way. There is not only automobiles, but there are auto parts and auto components that we will focus on under the PLI schemes that are being launched now. Now, even if you looked at the union budget for 2024, Madam Minister has also introduced some very impressive numbers and very impressive targets for PLI schemes, specifically for the auto sector. Again, where the rubber industry plays a very, very important role, and we hope to capitalize on some of these policies. But I'm actually here to sort of walk you through how you can think about your business in terms of expansion, in terms of growth, in terms of taking that next step or next plunge. We see a lot of foreign capital interest in these sectors, right? In rubber and rubber allied, rubber product sectors. Mostly on the manufacturing side, but there is also some on the supply side as well. But if we were to look at it just from a foreign investment perspective, I can walk you through some broad routes, modes, models, which you should think about and you should kind of be aware of when you're thinking of expansion. The most common route we see is FDI. It continues to be FDI. Ever since India's economy liberalized, I think this has been the favorite sort of foreign investment route, which is the route of investment for equity. If we are looking at investment, people look at two sides of the balance sheet. There's debt and there's equity. FDI focuses on all your equity investments, while ECB, which is external commercial borrowing, which is borrowing in non-INR denominated currency, that forms a part of your debt. So there's foreign capital coming in from both ends. There is FDI on one end and there is ECB on the other end, which is debt. When we're looking at FDI, there are, again, a lot of nuances in FDI. For example, some of the things that the government has done to promote investments in certain sectors, say infrastructure, they have created a certain route like FECI, which is actually better for certain sectors like infrastructure, biotechnology, startups, etc. But FDI as a sector is typically most commonly used for something like manufacturing. Why is it used mostly for manufacturing? Because when people are investing in equity and when they're investing in the capital of the company, they are looking at strategic long-term investments. They are especially in a sector like manufacturing, which is capital intensive, where there are huge risks to take. India is not, as much as we like to say that there is ease of doing business in India, but it is not that easy to do business in India at the ground level. There are a bunch of labor, environmental, land-related issues, particularly that come attached with FDI and manufacturing that we have to think about. So when people invest through the FDI route, which is the capital, which is the plain basic vanilla investing in your capital group, sort of route of investment, they're looking at strategic investment. Unhe aake matlab they don't want to exit like tomorrow. That is not the idea. They want to come, they want to stay, they want to grow your business, they want to grow their capital. And mostly, this comes not only from private capital, which is why you will see a lot of FDI comes in the form of actually joint ventures. I'm sure a lot of this cohort and group have come across joint ventures, have come across collaborations. I'm sure you have a lot of foreign interest and foreign players, especially in the Asian subcontinent, where you will see players who are interested in collaborating with you, either वो आपको technology offer कर रहे हैं, or maybe they're just offering some tidbits and some know-how or some R&D. If it is a limited sort of input, like if they're only giving you, say, some licensing of product or know-how or IP, then maybe a limited IP sort of arrangement or a collaboration would do. But where the partnership is more strategic, more long-term, more meaningful, I think joint ventures come in a big way. And here I think the few things to think about are where are the joint venture partners domiciled and why is that important? So India, I think the other word that we don't like anymore is China. That is because as soon as the lights dimmed on China, the lights sort of turned on in India. So we're very proud of that. But the government really doesn't like Chinese investment in India. They came up with something called Press Note 3. When Press Note 3 came up, I think most of the investment community was a little bit shocked because I don't think we were prepared for it. This came up in 2020. What Press Note 3 essentially goes on to say is that if you're trying to do business with China or any country that is sharing land borders with India, and by that they only meant actually China. Of course, there are interpretations of it, but what they were trying to restrict is Chinese investment in India. If you're doing business with anybody domiciled in a country which shares land borders with India, you have to go to the government for approval. Now, typically, FDI as a construct that we were just talking about, there are two routes. There is automatic rule and there is approval route. Approval route is typically taken in sectors which are slightly sensitive. Say for instance, defense may FDI is allowed up to 75% automatic, post that it is approval route for obvious reasons. Manufacturing on the other hand, rubber plantations on the other hand, actually have 100% automatic route FDI allowed with no conditionalities, with no restrictions. It is actually a very, very sort of liberal approach. Again, for obvious reasons, because the government does not intend to, put nuts and bolts and screws where it is unnecessary. But when this comes into play, what happens is a lot of your investments have to be looked at from the spectrum of, are you directly or indirectly doing business with China? Is the partner that you're talking to somehow invested in China? Because it's not just that the entity that you're dealing with cannot be from China. That entity cannot have any significant beneficial ownership in China, which actually becomes a problem, because what happens is then you have to look at who actually owns that entity at the highest level, and at many layers of entities are looked at to see actually if they qualify the significant beneficial ownership test. Now, this is also a subjective test. The government has not been very objective about this test. So this brings about some ambiguity when you're trying to do business with any country that shares land borders with India. Right? So domicile of your JV partner or anyone that you're doing business with becomes very, very important. That also determines how flexible your structure is, whether you need to go to the government, whether you don't need to go to the government. How do you fund your JV? Where do the funds come from, right? Are you funding the JV? Are you relying on debt? Are you relying on external sources? This is all contractually decided, but what is the underlying rule? The underlying rule is that if you are doing any business with anyone outside of India, you have to always remember that there is a fair market value at which the transaction can happen. So there is a floor when when the investment is coming in, it has to come in at a floor value, or there is a floor. You can't come in below the floor value. And when the investment is going out, when the JV partner or your foreign investor is exiting, at that time there is a cap. I think the reason for that is obvious, because RBI does not want foreign exchange to go out of the country so freely, and when they're coming in, they don't want them to come at a discounted rate. So you must understand that there is a fair market valuation that needs to be undertaken whenever you're doing business with a party that is not Indian, or as we call them, non-resident. Structures are varying. I mean, typically joint ventures are undertaken by incorporated companies. That's again a function of the fact that who can receive FDI, who can receive external commercial borrowing. It's mostly companies and of course LLPs. But again, now when you look at the licensing and the regulatory landscape, say for instance it's a manufacturing unit. For a factory's license or for any such licensing requirement, it is important that an entity is incorporated, whether it's an LLP or a JV co, as we call it, which is a joint venture company. So it's very important that the entity is first incorporated, and then you fund the entity, and then you go on to do business, right? Then we get into the nuts and bolts, whether it's land acquisition, whether it's approvals. There are a lot of regulatory issues that we face at each of those stages, but we're not going into that today. We're just trying to look at a macro sort of perspective on what would your investment look like. And now the most important part of it, which is the term, or the term for which your JV exists. And when do you plan to part ways, or do you plan to part ways? There may be a deadlock. You may disagree on certain things. Your partner may not want to stay in India and do business in India forever. That may be reasonable. So your agreement has to be such, and your documentation has to be such that there has to be a horizon, or a sort of, you have to think very long term when you're entering into a joint venture agreement, because you're not problem solving for today, you are not problem solving for tomorrow, you are actually problem solving for many hypothetical scenarios that may play out in the next 7 to 10 years. JVs, in fact, actually go into disputes very, very often. So you have to be very cognizant of the fact that you may or may not, this may or may not work out. Unlike any other contract which can be terminated, where parties can move on and exit, etc., here there's a foreign player and foreign capital sitting with you. So there is an RBI in the picture, and there is the government in the picture. So you have to really think long term when you are looking at a joint venture scenario, only because you have to be cognizant of how each of you are planning to exit the joint venture for various commercial reasons, and those could be plentiful. And as I said, I think it's very difficult to today think of each of those hypothetical scenarios, but I could give you some examples. One is, of course, how do you play out the management rights? How much control do you give this person? How reliant are you on what that person brings in? Say, for instance, it's technology that the person is offering you. How reliant are you on that technology? If that JV partner leaves, are you able to self-sustain? Because these will be considerations when they exit, and the government may actually ask you questions depending on which sector you are in. Even in manufacturing, if you are in some of the allied sectors, currently manufacturing is 100% automatic, but manufacturing of certain items, like for instance, defense products, that is restricted by the government up to 75%. So you have to look at all of these you have to look at it from very, very many different lenses. And I think that's why the most, although common, but complicated, you could say, document or most complicated structure is actually a joint venture. Because like I said, we typically see a lot of disputes also coming out of joint venture arrangements. Deadlock is another reason why most joint ventures end up hitting sort of a sorry path, because you may want something and your partner may not agree to it. So what do? You have to resolve it, but if it doesn't get resolved, then what? You cannot go into dispute, because that is not the most reasonable way to solve it. So your documentation actually has to provide for these things. Are you going to buy that person out? If you're buying that person out, we just spoke about fair market value. You have to look at valuation issues and look at how your entity is doing then, at what value are you going to buy this person out. So there are various considerations like this which you have to think about, which is why you can't be very myopic when you're looking at a collaboration, which I'm sure, or at least I assume that a lot of people today who are attending would be looking to do in the future. And there are going to be huge opportunities in the sector for joint ventures, for collaborative arrangements in the subcontinent. I'm going to go a bit further, and here we are talking about, so far we were talking about equity, which is again ownership in your company, or if you're a joint venture, this is co-ownership in a company. Now this is the borrowing side of things. How does this look? This has actually become pretty liberal after 2018. So pre-2018, there were some restrictions on who could lend, who could borrow, etc. Even today there is. This is all non-INR borrowing I'm sorry to repeat, but just to keep in mind that this is non-INR borrowing. This is all foreign exchange borrowing. Anybody who can receive FDI can receive ECB. So that's pretty straightforward. If you're an incorporated company in India, if you're an LLP, you can receive ECB. Again, in sectors in which FDI is permitted, we are dealing in sectors where FDI is permitted. Rubber plantations, manufacturing, permitted FDI up to 100%. ECB is very much an option. Who can lend to you? Now that's interesting, because pre-2018, an institute or a corporate abroad who did not hold any equity in your company or your entity could not lend to you. There was could lend to you. Now that restriction is done away with, which means that even if you have no relationship with that entity or corporate in terms of equity, or they don't hold any capital, or irrespective of whether they hold any capital in your company, they can lend to you, which is a fairly liberalized regime from what we've seen in the past. So, I mean, yes, in some ways there is ease of doing business at this level, at the policy level. We are going to now go into what the ease of business sort of looks like at the implementation level. Rubber Act, very relevant for the industry, because it's also been around for a while, except that there is now a bill which is currently in the parliament, and this session is going to be interesting because it's been tabled before this session, and it's going to be discussed in this session. So what are we trying to achieve with the rubber bill? Why do we need to sort of move away from the act and have this new bill? I think it's largely to take away licensing Raj. Rubber Act was an archaic act. मतलब 1947 का act था. It has lost relevance today. It does not make sense, again, from a deal-making perspective. The licensing regime in the 1947 act was a little impractical. It was onerous. Even if I just held rubber, I needed a license, which frankly did not make too much sense. What the rubber bill is trying to do, if I had to just break it down into certain, core elements, it tries to clarify and sort of streamline the industry. What does it cover? What does it want to regulate? What does it want to license? Now, the licensing here is very specific. Only if you're actually dealing in rubber, which is buying, selling rubber, is when you need a license. And the licensing regime has also been made fairly, you could say, liberalized. It's less cumbersome, and it would be, there's no, earlier you had to keep renewing your license, but here you just get the license and it remains valid until it's cancelled or suspended. I think the more significant changes have come vis-a-vis the rubber board. Now there is both the good and the bad. In some ways it feels like the government is trying to control and supersede the rubber board in certain circumstances. That is one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that I think they're trying to sort of streamline everything and trying to provide a mechanism where the government can stay involved if they need to be involved, which is, I think, probably a positive spin to how we are looking at how the rubber board is looking to get reconstituted in the future. From our perspective, I don't think these elements or these sort of fractions have a bearing on the investment landscape, but I'll tell you why we brought this up. Whenever there's investment in India, the one thing that investors, both corporates and private capital, like is stability. They don't like too many changes, and they don't like anything that seems like it is going to change in the near future. So from a stability perspective, I think that it's good that the act is getting amended, because there are, the modernization of the act is very important, but at the same time it's important that it needs to be done fast, because if it's just going to lie with the parliament for some time and it's just going to go up and down the houses, that's not very good for investor sentiment. Investors do not like unpredictability, uncertainty, whether this act prevails over that act, whether the bill is what we look at or whether the act is what we look at. Luckily, these sort of legislations and acts have no bearing currently on the investment side of things at all. It is only when I think you go into a slightly more academic or let's say from a business or operational